Old Grognard says, let's use house rules to fix Overland movement in 2nd edition AD&D. In the last two videos, I mostly covered the Overland movement rules as written in the PHB and DMG. The rules in those two books are a mess. They're difficult to understand and don't really agree with each other. In later material, they ignore most of that and they just make it work. None of this is any help to folks who are new to the system, so I'm going to attempt to fix it. How this is going to work is that I'm going to take each talking point from the last two videos in the order they appear and address them with house rules. Some of them will remain unchanged while others will require some effort to rework. The end goal of all of this is to have a coherent system that works with published material most of the time, and when there's a conflict, it can be easily resolved in a way that doesn't cause problems at the table. The first item we're going to look at is the 10-hour travel day as the basis for overland travel. I like this one because it assumes that travelers are going to stop to do things like eat, rest, and pull out the map to figure out where they're going, but doesn't have it where you have to declare those things specifically. It works, so I'm just going to leave it as is. The next thing we're going to look at are movement points. Most modules and settings are written with the idea that a creature's movement points are equal to twice their movement rate. Since most folks run it that way already, for our collection of house rules, I'm going to rule that all creatures have movement points equal to twice their movement rate when engaged in overland travel. So a human has 24 movement points, a heavy warhorse has 30. You get the idea. After the travel day and movement points, our next item is terrain costs for overland movement. These can be found on Table 74, which is on page 125 of the DMG. This table is written assuming movement points are equal to movement rate, not twice your movement rate, so that's why you have an entry that has a cost of 1/2 for clear and farmland. That's also why roads and trails can reduce the cost per mile to 1/2. The house rule I've always used for this is that the minimum cost per mile is 1, so I'm going to change the clear and farmland cost to 1. I'm not going to double all the other costs to correct for us using double movement points. While that would be correct on the math side, I've never run it that way, and I don't think it would make the game any better. I think it would just make the math and drudgery worse. Now I'm going to add in the trails column. As a quick refresher, trails cut the cost for a given type of terrain in half, but remember, we're also operating with the assumption that 1 point per mile is our minimum cost for movement, so this is what trails will look like on our table. I'm also going to round down any fractions just to make the math easier. So you'll notice now that a lot of these are now 1s, and that's intentional. This makes it where the DM has an easier time figuring overland movement, and on the player end of things, a movement cost of greater than 1 is uncommon enough to signal to the players that they've left the beaten path, sometimes literally, or they're somewhere out of the ordinary. The road column looks like this. Now, some of you might look at this and ask the question, what's the point of having roads if they have the same movement cost as trails on most terrain? And that's a valid question, and the answer is in how terrain modifiers work. This is the terrain modifier table from page 125 of the DMG. I decided there should be a house rule regarding how roads negate or lessen terrain modifiers. That rule in its raw form is that roads lessen terrain modifiers by 1. So a +2 on here becomes +1. +1 becomes nothing. ×3 becomes ×2, etc. This is what the table looks like if we apply the house rule. The idea behind this is that roads use engineering and planning to get around these problems. If you want to go there, you could have extreme heat and cold still affect things, but that's up to you. Actually, all of this is up to you because that's the joy of messing with house rules. Let's move on to rushed movement. Rushed movement works fine as is. I would use the house rule from episode 56 where your death saves for your mounts determine how far you go, but otherwise just keep it as is. Mounts also work the way they're described in episode 58, and we can use the methods described in that video to add more mounts and pack animals if we feel the need to do so. Just remember that with our collection of house rules that their movement points are now twice their movement rate when doing overland movement. The last item we need to look at are vehicles. They work like it says in the book and episode 58. Again, just remember that your base movement points are twice the draft animal's movement rate when figuring out movement points. For example, a mule with a movement rate of 12 has its movement rate reduced to 1/2 normal, which would be 6 when pulling a cart. Twice that is 12, so the mule cart would have 12 movement points per day. Also keep in mind that wagons, carts, and chariots can only move on trails, roads, and terrain with a cost of 1 per mile. As always, feel free to ask questions in the comments section. Thanks for watching. Teleportation Camel and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day.